They say home is where the heart is. For years, I believed that. My home, nestled in this picture-perfect suburban enclave, was my sanctuary, a place of quiet mornings, weekend barbecues, and the comforting predictability of life. The lawns are always mowed, the hedges always trimmed, and the only drama, you'd think, would be deciding which color annuals to plant. But sometimes, beneath that veneer of perfect order, a different kind of darkness brews, a darkness that doesn't scream or shout, but rather, meticulously, silently, undermines everything you hold dear. That's what happened to me. It didn't begin with a bang, but with a piece of paper, stark white against the emerald green of my lawn, a legal document, a court summons, the kind of thing you expect to see in movies, or perhaps, for someone else, in a world far removed from neatly trimmed rose bushes and friendly waves across the street. But no, this was addressed to me, in my home, in my supposedly peaceful existence, and the plaintiff, the Homeowners Association, or, more specifically, the woman who was the Homeowners Association in all but name, Karen. The name itself now carries a certain cultural weight, doesn't it? A caricature, perhaps, but one rooted in a very real, very unsettling archetype, the individual who mistakes their petty grievances for universal law, whose self-appointed authority suffocates the very notion of personal freedom. She wasn't just president of the HOA, she was the unquestioned monarch of every blade of grass, every exterior paint color, every permissible thought in the entire subdivision, and I, it seemed, had somehow, inadvertently, committed a crime against her kingdom. The crime itself, as listed in the daunting legal jargon of the summons, was almost comical in its triviality: an unapproved mailbox alteration, an excessive flower bed, a fence exceeding permissible height, absurdities, all of them, minor infractions that had been ignored for years, suddenly resurrected and weaponized. But I knew, deep down, that these were just the smoke screen. The real battle, the one that had been quietly escalating for months, lay buried much deeper. Literally, it was a gas line, a bright yellow ribbon of utility, running not along the communal property where it belonged, but directly, undeniably, underneath my own backyard. A potentially deadly oversight, orchestrated by Karen herself. Under the guise of community improvement, my attempts to address it had been met with a bureaucratic brick wall, a carefully constructed narrative that painted me as the problem, the unreasonable one, the disruptor of suburban harmony. The summons wasn't just a legal threat. It was a personal declaration of war, a move to silence me, to financially drain me, to make an example of anyone who dared to challenge Karen's absolute authority. This wasn't about property lines or community aesthetics anymore. This was about power, control, and the terrifying realization that your sanctuary could, in an instant, become your battlefield. The weight of that paper on my lawn wasn't just the weight of legal fees or court dates. It was the crushing weight of betrayal, of a system designed to protect communal living, hijacked and weaponized against an individual. It was the chilling understanding that the peace I so cherished was an illusion, easily shattered by a neighbor's misplaced sense of entitlement. This wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a fight for my home, my sanity, and the very definition of who owned what, and who, ultimately, held the power. The game had changed, and I had just been served. The unsettling feeling I got seeing Karen direct the utility crew finally materialized into cold, hard fact. It happened 2 weeks after the community outdoor kitchen was complete. I was backseating a patch near my rear property line when the small, bright yellow marker caught my eye. Utility flags are common, temporary, usually placed during planning. This one was different. It was tucked deep into the ground, almost hidden, and it marked the presence of a buried natural gas line. And it was, unequivocally, on my land. Faced with Karen's unwavering denial and bureaucratic obstruction, I did the only thing a citizen has left. I hired legal counsel. My attorney, a no-nonsense man experienced in property disputes, was initially stunned by the brazenness of the gas line trespass. He confirmed what I already knew. The liability exposure for the HOA was enormous, and the safety risks were unacceptable. We drafted and sent a blistering legal letter of formal cease and desist, detailing the liability and giving the HOA one final, non-negotiable deadline to begin remediation, or face an immediate lawsuit for trespass, property devaluation, and reckless endangerment. I felt a flicker of hope. Surely, the threat of bankruptcy, of massive insurance claims, would finally penetrate the wall of Karen's ego. I was wrong. The threat of legal action didn't temper her. It simply enraged her and made her more calculating. She didn't respond to my lawyer with a settlement offer or an apology. She responded by meticulously poisoning the well of neighborhood opinion. Suddenly, the private dispute was public, but only through her carefully crafted lens. She used the HOA's email distribution list to send out passive-aggressive community updates, obliquely referencing a difficult homeowner whose selfish demands were costing the HOA thousands in legal fees and were holding up vital community projects. She framed me not as a homeowner fighting for his property rights, but as a litigious narcissist trying to extort money from the community coffers. The whispers began almost immediately. Neighbors who had smiled and waved for years began to look away, their faces etched with disapproval. Karen had successfully leveraged her position to turn my fight for safety into a community-wide attack on my character. I was isolated, standing alone against the weight of a powerful corporate entity and the scorn of my own street. Then came the hammer blow, the ultimate act of calculated, vindictive retaliation. On the day my lawyer was preparing to file the lawsuit over the gas line, the HOA, under Karen's direction, preemptively sued me. They weren't suing to justify the gas line. They were using the full financial might of the community to launch a scorched earth campaign built on trivialities. The new lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal pettiness, focusing entirely on the minor architectural violations I mentioned earlier, the wrong shade of paint on my mailbox, the excessive height of a garden trellis, a few inches too many on a perimeter fence built years ago. These were issues that had either been tacitly approved or universally ignored across the entire subdivision. Now, they were formal, costly, court-mandated conflicts. Karen's strategy was brilliant and brutal. She forced me to shift my resources away from the primary, dangerous trespass, and instead, waste time and money defending myself against three separate, ridiculous, minor aesthetic complaints. The cost was immediate and devastating. I was forced to commit to a dual defense, the main, underlying safety issue, and the absurd retaliatory suit. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was an exercise in financial warfare. She was using the community's money, the dues I paid, to destroy me, purely because I dared to challenge her unauthorized, reckless decision to bury a gas line under my yard. The fight had escalated from a simple property dispute to a harrowing battle for financial survival and personal dignity. The conflict was no longer confined to the property line. It was consuming my life, fueled by the HOA Karen's relentless quest for unchecked power. The courtroom was where suburban pettiness met serious, unforgiving law. Karen and her expensive counsel were masterful in the opening days. They didn't even mention the gas line. They focused entirely on the mailbox, the fence, and the flower bed, painting me a nitpicking anarchist who had deliberately flouted the community rules simply because I didn't want to follow them. They presented photos of my wrongly colored mailbox with the solemnity one reserves for evidence of treason. It was a calculated legal strategy. Bury the serious crime under mountains of laughable bureaucracy. They sought to establish to the judge that I was inherently difficult. Therefore, my complaints, no matter how serious, should be dismissed. I had to sit there, silently enduring the character assassination, watching as my lawyer fought against the relentless tide of paperwork and professional obfuscation. But my lawyer was playing a longer game. He let them exhaust their trivial points, allowing the judge to absorb the full, ridiculous weight of their complaints. Then, he pivoted. It was time to stop talking about the paint on a steel box and start talking about the high-pressure gas line buried beneath my child's swing set. We called our first expert witness, a veteran foreman from the local gas utility company. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The utility expert, a man who dealt in facts, not decorum, was visibly uncomfortable but entirely honest. He testified, under oath, to the sheer danger of the situation. He laid out the city codes, citing section and verse, detailing the required depths and setbacks for that class of line. He stated, in clear terms, that the line's current location on my property was illegal, unpermitted, and constituted an immediate and severe safety hazard due to its shallow depth and its proximity to large, invasive tree root systems on my side of the fence. He confirmed that in the event of a rupture, the liability and potential for catastrophe extended well beyond my property line. As the foreman spoke, the judge's gaze shifted from cold formality to something closer to anger. I watched Karen, sitting rigid at the defense table. The smug certainty she'd worn for months began to crack. Her lawyer tried to object, citing relevance, but the judge overruled him swiftly and decisively. The mailbox suddenly didn't matter. The flower bed was irrelevant. We had dropped the court truth into the center of the room. Karen, acting alone, had recklessly endangered the lives of her neighbors to protect the aesthetics of a common area patio. The climax arrived when Karen took the stand. She was confident, almost rehearsed, in her early testimony, smoothly denying all knowledge of the gas line's rerouting. She maintained that she merely pointed the contractors to the general area and that any deviation was entirely their fault. She tried to maintain the posture of a diligent community servant being unfairly attacked. She was convincing, practiced in the art of the half-truth. But my attorney had held his ace. We presented the affidavit of the lead contractor. Faced with the utility company's testimony and the threat of criminal negligence charges, the contractor had confessed. He stated, under sworn penalty, that Karen had personally approached him, offered an undocumented cash bonus, and explicitly threatened to withhold the entire construction payment if he did not reroute the gas line to her preferred, illegal location. To reinforce this, we showed a candid photograph, taken by a bystander during construction, showing Karen standing over the open trench, clearly directing the contractor with an imperious wave of her hand. The court fell silent. Karen's carefully maintained composure finally, spectacularly, failed her. Her eyes darted wildly. The lie, exposed in the cold light of sworn testimony and irrefutable photographic evidence, became a visible, sickening thing. She had not only violated her duty to the HOA, she had committed fraud, engaged in intimidation, and endangered the community to get her way. The judge took a short recess, but the verdict, when he returned, was clear before he even spoke. He saw the abuse of power, the malicious retaliation of the countersuit, and the inherent danger of the core issue. He did not mince words. He dismissed all of the HOA's retaliatory claims, the mailbox, the fence, the flowers, with extreme prejudice. He then ruled definitively in my favor on the gas line. He ordered the HOA to immediately secure the services of a certified, permitted utility company to excavate, remove, and safely reroute the gas line to its originally approved location. The final hammer blow. He ordered the HOA to pay every single dollar of my legal fees, citing the frivolous and vexatious nature of their lawsuit against me. It wasn't just a victory. It was a total, humiliating, and financially devastating defeat for Karen and the tyranny she represented. The war was over. The truth was out. The courtroom victory was only the immediate tactical win. The true conclusion played out in the subsequent weeks, fueled by the public release of the court transcripts detailing Karen's deception, reckless spending, and willingness to lie under oath. The neighbors, who had once shunned me, now turned their anger and betrayal squarely onto her. They realized they hadn't just been misinformed. Their own money, their HOA dues, had been illegally spent to fund Karen's personal war against me and to cover up a dangerous act of trespass. It took a coordinated effort. But the community, finally mobilized by righteous anger and the fear of future liability, called for a special recall election. The final HOA meeting was a brutal reckoning. Karen, stripped of her authority and her legal counsel, stood alone, trying to defend herself against dozens of angry homeowners. The vote was unanimous. The queen of the subdivision was deposed. The woman who had ruled with an iron fist, who had used the bureaucracy as a weapon, was removed from power, Within 2 months, the specialized utility crew arrived. I watched from my porch as they systematically, carefully, excavated the illegal gas line from my yard, replacing the disturbed earth and finally restoring the property to its correct, safe state. A few weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in front of Corinne's immaculate home. She left the community, retreating into the silence from which she had launched her suburban tyranny. Her power, her reputation, and her entire reign evaporated. The financial cost of the war was neutralized by the judge's ruling, but the emotional cost lingered. I won back my yard, I forced a board to uphold its duties, and I brought an end to an era of abuse. But the lasting truth, the one that stays with you, is a vigilance you can never let go of. You learn that in the quiet spaces of suburbia, the battles are fought not with armies, but with deeds, permits, and a relentless commitment to the truth. My home was safe again, the line respected, but the memory of the fight and the chilling knowledge of what a neighbor is capable of will forever remain buried just beneath the surface.